Hi students, welcome to the BYJU'S Hindu News Analysis for 9th of December 2018. So let's get started. So let's look into the first article. So the first article that we will be speaking about is in reference to the Tibetan Buddhism as well as the Bon tradition. So when you see Buddhism as a religion, it got its wings spread across the Tibet in the earlier 8th century. So you had the concept of Buddhism as a religion being imported from India, and all because of the invitation of a Tibetan king called as Trizong Detsen. King Trizong Detsen was so impressed by this religion because of its love, because of its compassion and equanimity principles. What he did was he invited many Buddhist masters to Tibet and wanted to spread the Buddhism in this region of Tibet, and it is due to his efforts and due to his encouragement to these Buddhist masters that is why you see number of Buddhist texts being translated into the Tibetan region. So what you will see is it is due to invitation of Trizong Detsen that we have what is called as Tibetan Buddhism that we currently see in the belt of Tibet. So what is the philosophy of Tibetan Buddhism? So Tibetan Buddhism has essential teachings of Mahayana Buddhism along with application of certain tantric practices. So because it is a mixture of both Mahayana Buddhism as well as tantric practices, these tantric practices basically has certain other concepts that have been evolved with the Hinduism. Let's take for example, you have the yogic techniques or the use of the mantras or certain types of ritual practices. So these type of practices, rituals, mantras, which was also a part of Hinduism, was taken from the tenets of Hinduism, and when applied with the tenets of Mahayana Buddhism, that becomes the Tibet Buddhism. So Tibet Buddhism basically combines the essential practices of Mahayana Buddhism as well as the tantric practices. This tantric practices also believes in certain supernatural energy, which is one of the essential tenet of the tantric practices. So the Tibet Buddhism is present in the regions of the Himalayas, and it also spread across Asia. So the question that pops up is, how did it spread across the Asia? So what we have to understand in this reference is that there was Mongol invasion that happened in the 13th century, and this led to the establishment of the Mongol Huan dynasty, and due to presence of the Mongol expansion, it led to the spread of Tibetan Buddhism in Mongolia, in Tibet, as well as wherever this dynasty had its footprint on. So when you say where are the presence of Tibet Buddhism, initially it started off in the Himalayan region, in the Tibet region, but with respect to the expansionist policies of the Mongolian kingdom, it led to its presence in Mongolia as well as in China. What this article further goes on to say is that there are basically four main sects of Tibetan Buddhism. So what are these four main texts? So what we have to understand here is there is one of the schools called as the Nyingma, which was founded by Padmasambhava, and this happens to be the oldest sect, and this is followed by Kagyu, which was founded by Tilopa, and this Kagyupa tradition is headed by the Karmapa Lama. And important Kagyupa leaders include the Naropa, the Marpa as well as the Milarepa. And then you have the third sect, which is called as Sakya. This was created by Gongchok Gyalpo and his son Gungya Nyangpo. And then you have the fourth section called as the Gilog, which is founded by Songkhapa Lobsang Drakpa, also called as Je Rinpoche, and this tradition is headed by Dalai Lama. So that becomes very key important things, because this can be a prospective question in your prelims examination. So apart from this, we also will have to know about the Bon tradition. And when we speak of Bon tradition, what we have to understand is that it is a Tibetan religion. So this originated in Tibet. So this particular religion basically gives importance to all parts of life. It gives its beautiful relationship with the nature. It believes in ethical and moral behavior. It leads to development of love, compassion and joy in life, and this basically believes in certain tenets of Tibetan Buddhism. But what it also does is it has its basic tenets which were also not influenced by the Tibetan Buddhism. So even before Buddhism as a religion came up in Tibet, there were certain value systems in the region of Tibet. So it is this value system added with the Tibet Buddhism is what is called as the bond tradition. So this bond tradition has a unique prospect. What is it? So basically all these people who have learned this particular tradition have received their oral teachings and transmission from the teachers. So from what is started as a particular tradition of giving knowledge to its disciples, it started with the teacher and it has a particular lineage which is currently unbroken. So from the ancient times to the present times, this particular lineage has continued for life. So what we have to understand is that this bond tradition is a Tibetan religion and it has tenets of Tibet Buddhism as well as the original value system which was present in this particular region. And apart from this, what this article further goes on to speak about is the identity certification. So basically there are two types of identity certification. One is called as the Green Book. So what is this Green Book? So when we say it is Green Book, these are nothing but the identity certificates that are given by the Indian government to all those refugees who are coming up from the Tibetan region. So this acts as an identity card of being registered as a Tibetan refugee in India, and this article makes a thing of yellow card. And what is this yellow card or yellow book? This basically acts as a passport for all those Tibetan refugees. So these people are not the Indian citizens, so they need an identity, and in case they need to travel outside, they need a passport. So this yellow card will act as a passport which is given by the Ministry of External Affairs of India to all these Tibetan refugees who are there in India. So the problem right now is that there are number of Tibetan refugees are facing is that this particular permission will have to be given by the Ministry of External Affairs, and this will require a lot of scrutiny, and this will require a lot of verifications that needs to be done, and this has led to a lot of bureaucratic problem. Due to delay in this bureaucratic problem and police investigation, the number of refugees who are planning to go to other countries are not able to go currently. And apart from this, these people who have still got these certifications, that is the yellow card or the yellow book, will face further harassment in the embassies of different countries. Why? Because these embassies are not ready to accept this yellow card, because this is not a genuine passport that is issued by India, but instead it is acting as a passport. So number of countries are not accepting these type of yellow books, and this has become a major problem for all those refugees who are planning to go to these countries. So the major concept from this article is one from the diplomatic issues that are concerning the yellow book, and the other is in reference to the GS paper 1 of culture. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article is in reference to GS paper 2, which is an important part in your international relations. And what are we discussing about? It is called as Yellow Vest. In French it is called as Mouvement des Gilets Jaunes, as well as Yellow Jacket movement. So what is this movement? Basically, first question that we can pop up in your prelims examination is, in which country is this movement being organized in? So this particular movement is organized in France. So kindly remember, it is an movement that is currently taking place in France. So what is this movement all about? So basically, when you look into this movement, you had a number of people who formed and expressed their grievances on the social media. So they expressed their grievances with respect to the rise in the fuel prices. This set of groups who were expressing the grievances hit the streets so that the government takes them seriously. So the main agenda was the increase in the fuel prices, and this increase in the fuel prices would obviously lead to increase in their budget, and this could disrupt their lives. So in order to make sure that this increase in the fuel prices was comparatively reduced. Why? Because there was increase in the cost of living, and there was disproportionate burden that the government was putting in the form of tax reforms on the middle class as well as the rural section. So it is the middle class as well as the rural section which went in the form of protesting against the government in order to reduce the fuel prices, the reintroduction of the solidarity tax on the wealth that the higher class has, as well as coming up with the concept of the minimum wages, as well as the resignation of the president of France, that is Emmanuel Macron. So this particular movement, that is also called as Yellow Vest, basically was an agenda against the rise in the fuel prices. So they wanted the reduction of the fuel prices. At the same time, they wanted the French government to introduce the raising of the minimum wages. So this was the agenda. So apart from this, what you will also see is there were a number of other other splinter groups which came up together. Let's take for example the youth population or the students. So even these students started protesting against the central government. Why? Because they felt that the French high school examination and the university entrance procedure needs to be changed, and at the same time there were certain anti-immigration populists who wanted to block the populations of the migration that were stepping into the land of France. So you had number of other splinter groups which had their own agenda. But when you say the yellow vest, it basically involves all those people who are fighting against the fuel prices. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article that we are speaking about is with respect to an exercise called as the Crossbow 18. So what is this exercise all about? So this was an exercise code named Crossbow, which is conducted by the Indian Air Force, where it conducted combined guided weapons firing of surface to air missiles, which involve, let's take for example the Akash, the Spider, the Igla, which is imported from the Russia. So all this was done in the Surya Lanka in the Andhra Pradesh. And why did the Indian Air Force do it? Basically they wanted to do it because in order to check the Air Force defense preparedness, or they wanted to improve the skill set of their crew as well as enhance the Indian Air Force combat capability, and that is why they came up with this particular exercise. So this is what we need to know in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article says report on toxic talc worries India. So what is the context here? So there was one of the draft which is called as the risk assessment that was published by the Health Canada, and this is the countries, that is Canada's public health department, which says the talcum powder has some health concerns. So first important point that we have to understand is what is a talc. So talc or talcum is basically a clay mineral which is consisting of the hydrated magnesium silicate. So basically this is one of the minerals which is translucent, which has that pearly luster along with it. And when you see where is this talc powder usually formed, you will see it along the convergent plate boundaries. So we have the convergent plate boundaries as well as the divergent plate boundaries. So wherever two plate boundaries crash each other or they have that friction, it is developed along this particular area. So this talc as a mineral is most often found in that metamorphic rough of the convergent plate boundaries. So this particular talc, which is usually white in clay in substance, can be crushed, and when it is crushed it becomes the whitery powder, and this whitery powder is called as the talcum powder. So what are the uses of the talcum powder? It is widely used in cosmetics, paints as well as ceramics. So the next question that pops up is, why is it used in the cosmetics? Basically it is used in this cosmetic industry is because of its ability to absorb the moisture, absorb the oils and absorb odor, which serve as a lubricant and produce that astringent effect in the human skin. And that's the prime reason as to why this is used in the cosmetic industry. And talcum powder is among the most widely known talc based self-care products. But what this article goes on to say is that it voices certain health concerns. So what are these? So breathing in products containing talc can lead to coughing, difficulty in breathing, decreased lung function as well as scarring of the lung issue. And it further goes on to say using products containing talc in the genital area may cause ovarian cancer. The American Academy for Pediatrics has warned against the use of baby powder due to risk of serious respiratory problems. So what the American Academy of Pediatrics goes on to say is that there has been a particular notion that these talcum powders are good for the baby. Actually it is the same pediatric academy which goes on to say that the newborn babies don't require the powder, they do not even require the soap baths, but instead all that they need is the warm water, which is fine for their hygiene. And it further goes on to say that the International Agency for the Research on Cancer has classified perennial use of talc based body powder as possibly carcinogenic, that which is linked to cancer on the basis of limited evidence in the humans. And apart from this, the talcum powder is used to get rid of the sweat as well as the odor. How does it do it? It blocks the pores that are present within the skin, but these are the pores that were supposed to be remain open, but because they are closed by these talcum powders, there could be possible local infections like the follicularis or the boils or the skin eruptions, which can also be other health impacts. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So this article speaks about the world's tallest railway bridge. So this is important from the prelims perspective, so we will have to know certain facts with respect to the examination. So this world's tallest railway bridge will be constructed in the Manipur's Noni, and this is across the IJI river. So the most important point is the world's tallest bridge is in Manipur state, and this is across the IJI river. And you look into the current statistics, the record for the tallest railway bridge is now held by 139 meter Mala Rijeka viaduct in the Montenegro, and what we have is this will be replaced by the Indian one, which will have a pier height of about 141 meter. So this particular bridge that we are speaking about is part of the 111 kilometer Jiribam Tupul Impel project. This will have about 45 tunnels in the project, where the piers of the bridge were constructed using the hydraulic augers, basically to make sure that there is efficient and continual construction of this particular bridge. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So the next article is important again from the prelims perspective, and what we are speaking is about the pangolin. So the first important point that we have to understand is the IUCN status of pangolin is endangered, and then this pangolin is found in the Indian subcontinent, and basically this is an insectivore which feeds on the ants as well as termites. It is basically a nocturnal species and rests in deep burrows during the day as well. There are some unique attributes with respect to the pangolin. So what are these unique attributes? So you see these scales on the body of the pangolins, right? This can be used as an armor against the predator, and this particular species can further curl itself into a ball as a self-defense against predators such as the tiger. And the color of its scales that you see in the picture can be further varied and depending on the color of the earth according to its surrounding. So what are the possible threats with respect to these animals? One, it is threatened with respect to hunting for their meat, and various parts, especially the scales that you see on their body, is also used for the traditional medicine. So these animals that you see are exported to the China. Why? Because the Chinese traditional medicine basically believes that it will help in treating of psoriasis as well as the poor circulation. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So the next article is in reference to the Bittergaon. So what is this? So this is one of the temple architecture that we see in the region of Kanpur in the Uttar Pradesh. So the first important point from the prelims perspective is, where is this Bittergaon located? It is located in Kanpur in Uttar Pradesh. So this Bittergaon has been part of an ancient city called as Fulpur. So this brick temple that we are speaking about is one of the earliest surviving brick temples of India, and it is said that it is one of the largest Indian brick temple to survive from the time of the Gupta Empire. So when we look into the architecture basically involves the Nagara type of architecture. So we have three types of temple architecture. One is the Nagara style, which is there in the northern India, and then you have the Dravidian style, which is seen in the South India, and then you have the Vesara, which you see in the regions of Odisha and so on. So this particular architecture of the Bittergaon is basically a Nagara type of architecture. Why? Because it has a very pyramidal as well as tall shikara and as well as a great inner sanctum, and this shikara became the standard feature of the Nagara style of architecture. So whom is this temple dedicated to? So this temple at Bittergaon is dedicated to the Vishnu, Lord Vishnu. And why? Because there is a Varaha incarnation at the back of the temple, and this reference was given by Cunningham. So in 1861, Lord Canning appointed Sir Alexander Cunningham as the archaeological surveyor to the government of India. It is he who went on to discover this particular shrine, and it is he who gives the reference that it is a Vishnu temple, all because of a Varaha incarnation which is appearing on the bank of the temple. And apart from this, we also see other decorations. Let's take for example the Shiva and Parvati seated together, Ganesha, an eight-armed Vishnu, a Mahishasura Mardini, and many animal figures, flora as well as the foliage. So this becomes very important from the examination perspective, so kindly know all these facts. So what this article further goes on to say is, why is that we should be studying more and more of architecture, and this will give us a significant value. Why? Because when we know more of architecture, what we will be able to understand is how is that the progress of a man as well as the civilization appeared. How did the man use the various skill set? What were the skills of the artisans? What were the resources of the rulers? What were the richer sections of the society having? How did they spend the money on? What were the different types of architectural beauty that we see, as well as the tools and techniques that were employed in order to script this. So all this we would be able to understand when we get deep into understanding what an architecture is. So what this article personally feels is that we would be able to know the progress of the man and the civilization, the skill set that the artisans employed, and all the resources in and that particular area, and the tools that were used, so that this particular architecture marvel was finally symbolized. So this is what this particular article goes on to explain. So moving on, let's look into the next article. So what is this article all about? What we are discussing is about the Underman Secrets. So basically there are two types of secrets. One is the yellow secret, the other is the blue lip secret. And the most important point from the prelims perspective is both their IUCN status is least concern. And what we have to understand is these are the species of the venomous sea snake, and they are found in the Indian as well as the Western Pacific Oceans. And what is the most unique attribute of this? These banded sea snake hunt for their prey in the coral reefs, though they spend a lot of time underwater where they'll have to find for their prey, they'll have to find the catch, and what they have to do is they'll have to hunt for in order to quench their hunger, and at the same time they have to get back to the land to digest their prey, lay eggs, and even slow their skin. And another important point from the prelims perspective is they are nocturnal species. So what is the concern that this article goes on to speak about? So what this article goes on to say is that this particular secret use the gradual slopes of the sandy beaches to move from the sea to the uprooted trees dispersed along the intertidal zone. But the problem that this article goes on to say is the authorities in this particular region have uprooted the trees after the end of the study to make sure that this particular region becomes a spot for the tourism purposes. So this could be a potential threat to all these species is what is being articulated in this particular article. So as a recommendation bit, what this article goes on to say is we will have to give legal protection to the sandy beaches as well as implement the ban on certain activities which include sand mining as well as tourism, so that we would be able to conserve these sea traits is what this article goes on to speak. So this is what we need to understand in reference to this article. So these are the two important articles. IICR Kolkata developed simulation to predict solar activity over 10 years, and hot Asian water led to mass extinction study. These two articles will be explained in your geography this week. We will not be explaining in our current session. So moving on, let's look into some of the prelims practice questions. So it says Ilam Valley recently seen in news is in Pakistan. So let's look at the explanation. So it says it is taken from today's newspaper article. It says that the Ilam Valley is located between the Swat Valley as well as the Bunar districts in the province. So what is the context? It says the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province plans to construct a heritage park in Ilam Valley which carries historical significance to both the Hindus as well as the Buddhists. So what is this historical significance for the Hindus? So the Hindus basically believe that Lord Ram spent time meditating during 14 years of the exile during one of the phases, and at the same time the Buddhists also believe that the previous incarnation of Lord Buddha who gave up his life in this particular place, and that is the significant aspect. So moving on, let's look into the next question. It says, with reference to antimicrobial resistance, consider the following statements. Antimicrobial resistance, which is also called as drug resistant, results in the formation of superbugs. It happens when microorganisms change when they are exposed to antimicrobial drugs used to treat the infections they cause. India is home to several drug resistant bugs which are spreading fast and having noticed even in the operation theatres and intensive care units of several well regarded hospitals. So 1, 2 and 3 are all correct. So the answer for this is D. So let's look into the next question. It says, this is from the previous year question paper. Rashtriya Garima Abhiyan is a national campaign to eradicate the practice of manual scavenging and rehabilitate the manual scavengers. So let's look into some of the model answers for the mains. So the question says, the look-east policy of India existed implicitly even before it was made explicit by its cultural and trade relations. Analyze. So this is important from GS paper 1 as well as from the GS paper 2. So let's look into the answer. So the answer starts with, Jawaharlal Nehru had referred in his classic The Discovery of India to Southeast Asia as Greater India. So the Southeast Asia that we are currently speaking about is always a part of Greater India. Why? Because we had a cultural resonance. So it says Hinduism and Buddhism spread through the Asian continent from India, the former being carried by the traders, and Buddhism was taken through the Tibet to China and Korea, whence it reached Japan and Vietnam. As Indian trade and very limited to the military conquest expanded the cultural horizons, the religious message and Indian spiritual practices were not the only export, but even the language or the social customs as well as the styles of art and architecture, the dance, the music, the epic narrative all traveled from India as well. The Ramayana became an Asian, not just Indian epic, with versions being told and performed from Indonesia to Philippines. Indianization also include alphabetical basis of Southeast Asian scripts, the incorporation of Sanskrit in vocabularies, along with the adoption of the Hindu Buddhist religious beliefs. Even Japan was not immune to Indian cultural influence, having been taken over by the spread of Buddhism that came from India, as evident in absorption of Hindu goddess Lakshmi and Saraswati into Japanese Buddhism as guardian deities. So India's link to East was remarkably peaceful process set aside by the invasion of Srivijaya in Sumatra by South Indian Raja Rajendra Chola in the 11th century. India did not evince any imperialist ambitions in Southeast Asia. And on the conclusion bit, what we also have to write is that so Indianized kingdoms arose over the centuries throughout Asia and particularly Southeast Asia by importing Indian code customs, administrative organization on the Indian pattern, and laws based on the code of Manu, the Indian lawgiver. So kindly start off with the cultural one and then end it up that the laws as well as other things were also picked up from India. So this is what we need to write in reference to this article. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.